I've got some good news and I got some bad news. But essentially, Bungie came on to the DCP podcast last night and talked shop, essentially giving us details on Void 3.0, everything from buff changes to nerf changes to what's aspects and what's fragments. A lot of details here given to us from Kevin Giannis and Samuel Dunn. So fellas, I will be dropping links to pretty much everyone's socials in the description below. With that being said, let's go through this long list of clarifications. First up, at 5 minutes and 29 seconds in the podcast, Mylan actually brought up Trapper's Ambush and essentially that Shadow Dive. Now, per Kevin Giannis, Trapper's Ambush will not synergize with Stasis in any way. So essentially, don't expect to have some Stasis crystals out there and then you can void Shadow Dive into them. No synergy there. Now, at 7 minutes, Mylan actually brings up the debuff effect or the weaken effect that we can cause with our void abilities. Weaken is a global 15% debuff against PvE targets and a 7.5% debuff against PvP targets. Now, Shadow Shot Tether will still remain at 30% debuff, and it's very apparent here that they don't want us just relying on weaken like we used to with like Oppressive Darkness. Something to take note of, again, the highest debuff takes priority. The same with buffs. So if you apply a 15% debuff to an enemy and then proceed to use your Shadow Shot Tether and apply a 30% debuff, those do not stack. The 30% just takes priority over the 15%. Now, it was also mentioned at 8:50 that Hunter Void 3.0 is focused on survivability with invisibility and applying debuffs with your abilities and your super. Hunters will play the support role by causing teammates to also go invis, and that these debuffs apply for everyone. And there was a lot of discussion there about Hunters as well. It's like, what is the identity of Hunter? And it's that elusiveness alongside high uptime and abilities. Now, at 10:14, it was confirmed that Hunters are losing Heart of the Pack. Now, Heart of the Pack is actually there on Bottom Tree Night Stalker currently in the game, where throwing a smoke bomb would make you and nearby allies invisible, and then that providing that would grant you Heart of the Pack buff, which would increase things like weapon haste, mobility, recovery, and resilience. Now, Hunters are losing Heart of the Pack, and Hunters will only have one smoke bomb that will apply weakening to targets. Now, using Trapper's Ambush is what will enable your smoke bomb to turn you and your allies invisible. And you can see that right there where you actually go into dive on the ground and you're holding the actual smoke in your hand. And there's like a combination of things where you're weakening targets, you're casting invis on your allies, and then of course you could still just cast the snare bomb itself, which still causes allies to become invisible. Now, at 11:40, it was confirmed that Keen Scout is now a fragment, and that Flawless Executioner is now called Stylus Executioner and no longer requires headshots while crouched to activate. Lockdown is also a fragment. So again, Keen Scout allows you to sprint and sneak faster, and you also gain Enhanced Tracker. That will be a fragment. And Lockdown allows for our grenades to last twice as long, also a fragment. But just to circle back again there to what was said about Stylus Executioner. Again, all you have to do is defeat void debuff targets, weaken, suppress, or even volatile. And every time you do this, you're granted invisibility and true sight. Now, while invisible and after a Stylus Executioner, your next melee attack will also weaken enemies. This is both a buff and a debuff. Like for PvP, this is to me a nerf, because Flawless Executioner, you can just run around with Chaperone and proc invis and get wall hacks back to back, just as long as you were crouched when you got that precision kill. Now though, with Stylus Executioner, you're gonna have to apply a void debuff in some sort of way. Weaken, suppress, volatile. And I'm not saying that there's not gonna be a way in which we can do that consistently. It's just inside of PvP, that's gonna be completely dependent on your uptime with your void abilities. And of course, we can build into that. It just requires a few more hoops to jump through in order to gain that true sight ability. Now, at 13:30, there was a lot of discussion about the new animation for the dodge. And animations overall was actually talked about a bunch here. First up, they did change the way the new dodge feels. They actually made it 30% longer than other dodges, and that this animation change will override both Gambler's Dodge and Marksman Dodge, but you're still going to get the same function for each of those dodges. Now, the reason why this was interesting to me is because they actually started talking about the different animation changes they have for everything. Think like Bastion, its animation, how it's completely different, where you got this overhead slam to your shield, but it's essentially just you applying a barricade. And then another one was brought up about Offensive Bulwark that of course has all the passives, but when you're overshielded, your hand is actually covered in void light. Every aspect has its own animation, meaning you're gonna be able to pick up on the battlefield, hey, what's that guy using? Oh, I see the void light, he's overshielded. Bastion, that long dash. Even before even looking at the UI, the animation itself is gonna give it away. Now, at 14:50, there's some talk about the diamond system, which is what we currently have on everything outside of Stasis. And it was stated that the passives that reinforce the mechanical fantasy, but it didn't do a good job presenting the actual fantasy thematically. Now, if there's an active thing that you're doing, then there needs to be something reinforcing that action. Some melees are now gone because they were just augments and not actually new abilities. So again, leaning into that, that. They want us to visually see the differences between combining abilities, aspects, and fragments. And again, circling back to offensive bulwark, you'll be able to see that distinction clearly. Now, 1541, void shields will function the same way as an overshield. Now, the void overshield grants increased damage resistance against combatants, so inside of PvE, and will instead give increased health inside of PvP. It won't heal you, it'll just stack on top of whatever your current health is. And that shield and health bump is about 45. The only question I have is, how does this stack with Icefall Mana, right? Now, a couple things were brought up here about Tether. At 726, Tether will actually activate and move much faster. Shattering Strike was also brought up, that it is now rolled into Stylus Executioner. Again, the backside of Stylus Executioner. Once you actually get that Invis and True Sight going, voila, you got Shattering Strike. Now, 2044, it was confirmed that Hunters are not getting Blink back, at least not on Void. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I was very hopeful in that video we made about Void 3.0 for the abilities we wanted to see back. But to be perfectly honest with you, I never really expected Hunters to actually get Blink back. But at least it's on their radar, right? At least they know that we would love to see Hunters have Blink back. And while we're at it, can we give Titans some Blink? You know what I'm saying? I just want to be able to blink with a hammer. The big hammer too, right? Like that just scared the hell out of people. Now, 2053, it was confirmed that Void Warlocks have all 3 glides plus Blink. And we saw that the other day. Again, Burst Glide, Strafe Glide, Balance Glide on top of Blink being added there. That's why it has 4 actual jump options. Now, 2104, Combat Provision was brought up, where grenades restore melee and melee restore grenades. Now, this has now been broken up into 2 different fragments. One being Echo of Provision, damaging enemies with grenades grants melee energy, and Echo of Exchange, melee kills grant grenade energy. Now, this is obviously their way of splitting the difference here, and it's not a big surprise. We already see things like this with our stasis fragments. They don't want to like overload a single fragment because that's how they keep things balanced, right? Even though we're not in that same diamond system, Bungie's biggest limiter here is how many fragments we can hold at once. Now, 24 minutes, Moebius Quiver should have very high DPS. You can even pair it with Orpheus Rig to get a third volley of those 3 tethers. Nice. Hopefully the damage will match because again, with Moebius Quiver now, right? You get the first tether off, you apply the debuff, and then you proceed to line up all those shots afterwards. I don't play with it enough, but somebody let me know overall if the DPS here is looking to outpace that of what we currently have with Moebius Quiver or not. I will say this, remember, you're getting these volleys out very quickly, meaning you're not stuck in this animation for a super long time. So even though total damage might be better currently, I think the fact that you can just fire these volleys back to back so quickly and then immediately get to your weapons, the speed of which you can do that now really means your overall DPS will be better. Now, it was also brought up about Khepris Sting. Will Khepris Sting work with Trapper's Ambush? The answer to that, yes. Again, Khepris Sting gives you Touch of Venom, where punching someone with full melee energy will instantly cast a smoke bomb, and you gain True Sight while in your own smoke bomb. Your smoke bombs also deal increased damage. This will work with the actual Trapper's Ambush Void Dive. So you're going to get all of those effects. Not only are you going to cast Invis on your teammates and yourself, but you're going to instantly gain True Sight in the process and debuff your enemies. I guess the question is, you know, are you going to get shotgun during that Void Dive animation? Because with Stasis, you would apply crystals like a glacial grenade on the ground. That would, of course, block your enemy's line of sight, or if you directly landed it on them, would literally freeze them in place. And then you were able to easily follow up with an easy Shadow Dive kill. You're not going to have that here. Now, 27 minutes and 5 seconds, it was confirmed our Barricade was identical to what it is now. As in, if you cast a Barricade, take Bastion for instance, and an enemy walks through your Barricade, it will still apply damage, but it will not apply any void effects. Now again, Titans will have a shield throw projectile melee as well as a shield bash melee. Now, shield bash will essentially be the same. It will suppress the target and of course add a weakened debuff to that enemy as well as the surrounding enemies as well. But the shield throw will actually do 60 damage in PvP. This is less than shoulder charge. And they stated that they didn't want the shield throw to be as potent as shurikens and celestial fire were in their prime. What I'm getting from that is that the shield throw should have pretty good tracking, but of course substantially less damage. But if y'all remember, like celestial fire, so good. Shurikens, stupid good. They had crazy tracking and damage from the very get-go. I think I'm okay with the shield throw doing this because again, we're gonna be able to build into our overshield when that shield throw makes contact. Now, at 30 minutes, it was confirmed that Ward of Dunn is moving to a tier 1 super. And they stated that considering they actually nerfed the amount of orbs generated by Ward of Dunn with the 30th anniversary, they're not worried about players snowballing with bubble titans inside of PvP. However, a huge nerf, a substantial nerf. Weapons of Light will no longer grant a 35% buff, but instead a 25% buff. Personally, guys, I don't know why they made this change, because now I'm just gonna rock Well of Radiance for literally everything, at least in regards to damage phases. And to me, Well of Radiance Radiance already is so easy to use, whereas Bubble, you have to like actively dip in and out of the bubble to get the buff. It's not like you're getting healed unless you're pairing it with like Saint 14 or something. And I think the only reason why we even saw Titans in-game content was for that 35% buff. Now at 32 minutes, Defensive Strike is being moved to the Shield Throw Melee. And again, we've seen gameplay of this where the shield makes contact and gives you little small chunks of Void Overshield. Now the resupply health regen has been moved to the Control Demolitionist aspect. Now Control Demolitionist, one of my favorite abilities, is found on Middle Tree Sentinel, and essentially just hitting a target with a Void ability will attach these Void Detonators, and then that further hits would cause the detonator to explode, dealing even more damage to the surrounding targets. And of course, this greatly synergizes with all your Void Fragments and abilities. Resupply is an effect that allows for you and nearby allies to gain health, as well as grenade and melee energy when your Void Detonators explode. This used to be two separate traits. They're simply just merging the two as an aspect of. Now at 34 minutes, Dune Marchers will not be able to spread the weak debuff. Boy, that would be nasty, right? Now at 34 minutes, it was mentioned that the Void Overshield and base Overshield are different in the game. Now it was mentioned that no backup plans made the cut, and it will apply that Void Overshield. And again, when you have full melee energy, Shotgun Final Blows activates your Defensive Strike, consumes your melee energy, gives you that Overshield, and of course Shotgun Final Blows also give you melee energy. The point is that no backup plans should synergize just fine with our Void 3.0 subclass. If I'm understanding this correctly though, Icefall Mantle, which isn't necessarily tied to Void, but to all barricades, just grant an Overshield and not necessarily a Void Overshield. Now you ask me what's better, what's worse? Normally, the more synergy you can get out of something, the better, no matter what. What I'm saying is I don't know if we're necessarily going to see a stacking here of Overshields on Icefall Mantle. Now moving on, at 36 minutes, we hear Bungie talk about the Warlock animation when you actually have an Arc and Void Soul at the same time. And the question was actually brought up by Mylan. It was like, yo, can you be your own army? Like, what if you were standing in your friend's Arc Soul Rift? And then you happen to be rocking Child of the Old Gods with Void 3.0, and you pop your Rift. And then, what if you were using No Time to Explain, spawning that Sentinel to go in there and help you kill things? You will essentially have 3 little fighter buddies next to you. Now, Kevin brought up here that they actually spent a lot of time on this, but supposedly there's going to be some sort of unique animation and interaction between Arc and Void Souls at the same time. I think Bungie's going to go crazy with this, right? I think eventually we're going to have a Solar Soul. And then before you know it, you've got an entire fire team of Soul Buddies. Now, in 37 minutes, Devour was confirmed to no longer reset your timer. It adds a small chunk of time to your timer, but doesn't actually reset it. Now, if you happen to use the Fragments, Echo of Persistence, this increases the time added by a couple of seconds. Now, Devour will have a maximum of 17 seconds, and you no longer consume your grenade to proc Devour. Any Void ability kill will now proc Devour. So it's like a combination here of like, yes, it is a nerf, but at the same time, ease of use has gone up here. I think it just really comes down to how much time are we able to add with every kill with Devour active. Is it 4 or 5 seconds? Does it have diminishing effects? Now, it was also mentioned much later in the TWAB that Devour and the amount of time that it returns depends on 2 things. The source of the kill, so whatever it is, I guess, that you're killing, and whether or not you have the fragment slotted. So I think overall, higher tier enemies, majors, etc., will give you back more time for Devour. Now, 40 minutes and 56 seconds. Each class has their own specialty. Hunters, Invis and Weaken, Titan, Overshield, Warlock, Devour. But each class should be able to tap into everything eventually through build crafting. So the example was actually given that Warlocks should be able to utilize Invis, just not as easily as Hunters can. So will Titans get Devour? I'm still hopeful. Now, 42 minutes, it was confirmed Warlocks only have 1 melee, which is that Pocket Singularity. It's a short-range projectile melee, similar to Celestial Fire, but plays much differently than Celestial. And we've seen gameplay of this already a number of times. It's essentially this unstable ball of void energy, which will detonate and push enemies away, and of course, make them volatile. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it probably sounds a lot like Atomic Breach, right? So imagine Atomic Breach, but with more range. Now, on the topic of grenades, Warlocks will only be able to charge Vortex, Axion Scatter, and Magnetic Grenades. So it's not like they can overcharge a Suppressor Grenade. Now, Scatter Grenades last longer, and they also track more aggressively toward the target. Nothing Manacles will directly inherit this new projectile behavior. Guys, I have not used Nothing Manacles in so long. Did it ever get its damage fix? Wasn't that the bug surrounding Nothing Manacles, that the damage was actually less than normal Scatter Grenades? Now, 49 minutes, it was mentioned that veteran players will have access to everything Void 3.0, and that new lights will go through a process of unlocking and learning the Void 3.0 layouts. There will be 4 fragments that are locked behind the Raids World First. Now, 52 minutes, it was confirmed that Void 3.0 will be free to all players. This is an important note here, guys. I know we've mentioned it a number of times, but Stasis was not free. You need needed to buy Beyond Light. So it's good that they're making this free. Suppression Grenades will actually have the highest cooldown now. Actually confirmed from Kevin here. Essentially, with Suppression Grenades being present on all classes, there was a concern of too much suppression happening. So they actually slapped on the highest cooldown for Suppressor Grenades, and they even changed like how long it suppresses for. So actually inside of PvP, it only suppresses for 5 seconds, but still 10 seconds inside of PvE. And considering the Lucent Brood, I'm sure many of us will be using Suppressor Grenades inside of PvE as well. Now at 1 hour and 3 minutes, we got details on these super tier changes. Nova Bomb remains unchanged at tier 3. Moebius Quiver will remain unchanged also at tier 3. Deathfall is moving from tier 3 to now tier 4, so it will be faster. Arc Staff is moving from tier 3 to tier 2, so it will be slower. Behemoth, Shadebinder, and Fist of Havoc are all being moved from tier 1 to tier 2, so they will all be slightly faster. And Dawnblade is getting a slight nerf going from tier 2 to now tier 1. Again, some of this was confusing because they corrected themselves later in the podcast on some of these tier changes. But again, the tier system here for our supers is just another way in which Bungie likes to balance all of these subclasses. Now, in 1 hour and 10 minutes, Vortex Grenades and its pool is much smaller than the super pool, but of course, it will still have that pool effect. Now, at 1 hour and 11 seconds, it was asked about Ruinous Effegy and if the orb from Ruinous Effegy will synergize with Void 3.0 aspects and fragments since it counts as weapon damage. And the answer to that is yes. Yes, it will. And you can just tell there the way Ruinous is working, especially when you pick up that orb and you're slamming and of course you're blocking. It makes sense also why Bungie is actually rebuffing this trace rifle. I think it's going to synergize very well, almost on the same level as like Agar Scepter with Stasis. You're going to get that same effect here from Void 3.0 and Ruinous Effegy. Now, at 1 hour and 17 minutes, Void weapons all should synergize with Void 3.0. The same thing goes for Arc and Solar 3.0 when they release. The main thing is that Void weapons will apply volatile. Essentially, they're going to be volatile rounds. So be prepared for lots of Void explosions. And this, of course, will synergize with whatever you're using in your Void 3.0 kit. And as a final note, at 1 hour and 28 minutes, Bungie's goal for PvP is to reset the power bar with new 3.0 subclasses. Bungie wants people to run Stasis and Void and to feel like the 2.0 experience is subpar. They don't want Solar and Arc to feel worthless, but they want them to feel less competitive. So expect to see a lot of Void and Stasis in PvP. It's obvious, guys, Bungie is trying to nudge us, to push us to adopt all these changes. And going from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2, we know that taking our abilities and literally wrecking them is not going to make us want to use your new format. If you want us to use your new format, you have to take the Stasis approach. Maybe not that extreme because Stasis was super busted at the very get, but it has to be potent enough to intrigue us. Right now, from what I'm seeing, I am intrigued. I don't have all the fragments in front of us. Yes, there are some things here that we can say are nerfs, most notably with the super tier changes and the splitting of certain abilities into 2 fragments. However, that's not to say we won't be able to build craft way beyond what we currently have. And I think that's going to be the case, right? That is the goal here, is for us to forget the diamond tier subclass trees that we've been used to and make us completely adopt this new format. Well, guys, that is our breakdown from that podcast. Feel free to check out all the links. If you're new here, hey, yo, subscribe, man, and slap that like button like your mama taught you right. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.